Good afternoon. I would like to declare a conflict of interest. The research was funded by Nestlé and I am an employee of Nestlé Research. So today I'll present to you about tackling nutrient inadequacy in toddlers and preschool children. So what is toddlerhood? It is a special time of rapid physical development between infancy and preschool, and it encompasses a number of key milestones, including cognitive, emotional, social development, as well as the maturation of the immune system. And all of these set the foundation for later life. And adequate nutrition is also a key factor in supporting these milestones, as well as for normal growth and development. So toddler nutrition is also an important milestone beyond infancy as children begin to have more independence and they have more established family meals and snack patterns, and to enable them to fulfill their nutritional needs. However, evidence suggests that children under the age 5 are not compliant to these dietary guidelines and that their diet is suboptimal. And that leads to nutrient inadequacy, and as you will see later, that is highly prevalent in this age group, and that may hinder their growth and development. And this picture here, this figure of MAP, shows our FIT study, which stands for Feeding Infants and Toddler Study, where we have observed 27,000 children from birth to 4 years across 6 countries, including the US, Mexico, Brazil, Russia, China, and the Philippines, where we have very detailed food consumption data and nutrient intakes. So just to give you some examples, we observe across these countries that children are not having enough fruit and vegetables. You can see in this bar charts that in the Philippines, for example, children are having very little fruit and vegetable. And although US may seem to be doing very well compared to the other countries, if I tell you that the actual recommendation for children 2 to 3 years for fruit and vegetables is 300 grams, you can see that children are still a long way off from being having enough fruit and vegetables. And we also find that a lot of children are drinking sugar sweetened beverages. So in the top left-hand corner here, we see that around 4 in 5 children in Mexico are having some kind of sweetened beverages, and also fairly high in Russia as well. And you may observe that with age, children are having more and more of these sugar beverages. And in contrast, in terms of dairy intake, we see the opposite. As children age, they tend to have less and less dairy products. And you can see here, after the age of 2 years, only about 20% of children are having some kind of dairy on a daily basis. So, and as a result, we observe fairly high nutrient inadequacy among toddlers across different countries. Here I highlighted vitamin A, C, D, E, calcium, iron, and zinc across these 6 different countries. And you can see that more or less inadequacy exists for all these nutrients. But I would like to highlight vitamin D. You can see where we have data, the prevalence of vitamin D inadequacy is very high. And similarly for calcium, the prevalence is also high in most of the countries. And I would also like to highlight 2 countries, Philippines and Russia. You can see that across the board, we see fairly high inadequate intakes across these different nutrients. And just to zoom in on the Philippines as a case study for the rest of this presentation, here I expanded the different nutrients in terms of nutrient inadequacy. And you can see here across children aged 1 to 2 years in the Philippines, around 50% or more are inadequate of most micronutrients, excluding selenium. For example, calcium, iron is also very high. Folate is also 3 in 4 children are inadequate, and vitamin D and vitamin E are also very high in terms of inadequacy. And what we find from the literature is that both quality and the quantity of food consumed in the Filipino children population is suboptimal. In particular, we find a lot of children are not having any dairy or very small amount every day. That these children in particular have the lowest energy and macronutrient intakes and highest level of micronutrient inadequacy. So in this context, we conducted a dietary modeling study to investigate a theoretical impact of improving dairy consumption in Filipino children across the population. So what we did was we took the Philippines National Nutrition Survey 2013 data on children aged 1 to 4. We had about 3,000 children. And we identified the children who did not meet the government recommendations of 1 serving of dairy per day. And these were around 54% of children aged 1 to 2 years, and in the older age group of 3 to 4 years, in around 74%. And we observed 2 types of milk that are typically consumed in this population. Firstly, it's a powdered filled milk. So it's a milk that is mixed with vegetable oil that is aimed for the family, is highly fortified in some nutrients such as calcium and vitamin A. And the second type of milk is called a young child milk beverage. And these are beverages that are fortified with a wide range of micronutrients that is more tailored for the toddler population, or age 1 to 5 years. We didn't see a lot of cow's milk in the Philippines. It's not commonly consumed, fresh milk, because it's hard to store in a very hot country. So essentially, we applied dietary modeling, which is defined as a method to understand how changes to the amount or the types of foods or beverages within a dietary pattern, which may impact the meeting of, which may impact nutrient needs. So we're playing with a little bit how we change one food or product in a daily diet, and what could be the theoretical nutritional impact. So we applied dietary modeling to children who did not meet this dairy recommendation. And we did it through 2 scenarios. First of all is to add 1 serving of powdered milk into their diet to bring everyone up to the recommended level of 1 serving of dairy per day. And the second scenario is essentially adding 1 serving of YCMB into their diet to bring them in line to the recommendation. And then we compare the nutrient intakes of children before and after applying the dietary modeling. And we also assess the level of nutrient inadequacy before and after. And we also did a Wilcoxon sign test to compare the 2 scenarios, whether there are significant differences between the 2. So for results, first of all, in terms of macronutrient intakes and energy intakes, we can see that at baseline, which is the blue bar, these are the children who were not meeting their dairy recommendations. So these children typically have a very low energy intakes, about 550 kilocal per day, where the recommendation or the estimated energy requirement in the Philippines for this population of children aged 1 to 2 years is around 1,000 kilocalories. So they're meeting only about half of this requirement. So having an extra serving or having 1 serving of dairy per day will increase this calorie intake, bring them a little bit closer to the recommendation. In terms of macronutrients, we see that carbohydrates is predominantly their main source of macronutrient. Generally speaking, their protein intakes are meeting the estimated average requirement of the EAR. However, fiber intake is fairly low. In terms of mineral inadequacy, before and after, we see that before the modeling, almost all children are inadequate of calcium intake, here, 99% for the younger age group. So by adding a serving of dairy, we can see that we could reduce the level of inadequacy, particularly for calcium, selenium, and zinc. Across the two age groups. But in addition, adding a serving of YCMB, we can see a greater reduction of inadequacy for iron, magnesium, selenium, and zinc. In terms of vitamins, a similar picture, but the children start off with very high level of inadequacy pretty much across the board. By adding a serving of dairy, either powdered milk or YCMB, we see a reduction of vitamin inadequacy. With a serving of milk, we see a great reduction in vitamin A and riboflavin inadequacy, where we don't observe any more inadequacy in these two nutrients. Similarly for YCMB, with one serving, we were able to reduce vitamin C inadequacy to 0%. And overall, with YCMB, we again see a greater reduction of inadequacy levels across all the micronutrients, across all the vitamins. In particular, vitamin D and vitamin E. Although for vitamin D, it's not a huge reduction, but as we all know, that is a nutrient that is very difficult to reduce inadequate intakes in. So every little helps really. So we also observe a similar pattern for children aged 3 to 4 years. So just to conclude, across the world, toddlers and preschool children have really suboptimal dietary patterns, low intakes of fruit and veg and dairy, but high intakes of energy-dense foods and sweetened beverages. Micronutrient inadequacy are common in different parts of the world, particularly for calcium and vitamin D. And the results of our modeling study basically shows that bottom line, having a serving of dairy or just meeting this dairy recommendation would help to improve nutrient intakes and reduce inadequacy in micronutrients that are highly prevalent in this particular population. And that's having a serving of YCMB can help achieve a greater reductions in a wide range of micronutrients, including vitamin D and folates and vitamin E that are typically difficult to achieve, and iron also. These nutrients are important to support the physical and cognitive growth and development, as well as normal immune function during toddlerhood. So with that, I would like to acknowledge my collaborators from the FNRI, which stands for the Food and Nutrition Research Institute in the Philippines, also colleagues from Nestle Research and Nestle Philippines. Thank you very much for your attention.